because the hormonal influence is going to generate, because it can vary in when hormones are present and how, excuse me, how much of it is present. You can create an enormous spectrum of variety. Give you a little bit of a feeling of the variety and the awesome power that these different layers and hormones have in determining the diversity that we see. And along the way, we'll be doing it through looking at these 4 key questions. What is sex? Why does sex exist? How is it manifested in nature? And why does it have the manifestation it does? And the reason I keep putting sex in there is because there's no reason to have female unless you've got sex. And female is in contrast to male, and it takes 2 to tango. So when I use sex, it's not that I'm ignoring female, it's that you can't have female without having sex. Sex is the underlying event in all aspects of reproduction. And reproduction is extremely important because it is the underlying event in all aspects of evolution. So we see sex and reproduction throughout all aspects and all forms of life. Why is sex so important? It's because you get a tremendous amount of variation through sexual reproduction. But you start with parents, parent 1 and parent 2, and they have 2 copies of their 1 chromosome. But you can see based on the colors, they don't have exactly the same forms of the genes. So maybe one has a red eye color and the other has blue eye color for the gene for eye color. And during the course of reproduction, those copies within each parent get split into the gametes. And those gametes get recombined, one from parent 1, one from parent 2, into the possible offspring. And you can see created 100%. Instead, we've got a blend and a mix of the 2 of them. And that variation has turned out to be extremely advantageous. It generates variety that allows the offspring to deal with what may be changing environmental situations. It reduces the risk of inheriting genetic disease. If you've got a disease on both of the chromosomes, when you pull them apart, maybe only one gets inherited, and maybe the other parent doesn't have that disease gene. So you end up being free of the gene, even though you may carry a hidden copy of it. And it also allows the accumulation of advantageous mutations so that organisms continue to have novel variety from mutations. And when that variation is advantageous, it ends up accumulating through the process of reproductive, through sexual reproduction. There are some disadvantages. An individual may not find a mate, and then that individual, even if an individual mates, there's no guarantee that the offspring will be born, will survive, or will reproduce. So it's got its downfall, but the upside is so much more powerful that it is overwhelmingly the major way of reproducing for almost all organisms, and certainly almost all multicellular organisms. And just to blow your mind a little bit, all those different colors represent all the different ways in which sex is determined in different organisms. And fortunately for you, I am not going to talk about any of them except for one. So the one I'm going to talk about is the human form, which is what we see in mammals. And that is the situation where 2 X's are the female chromosomal composition, and an X and a Y are the male composition. And we share that with beetles and with few other insects in the animal kingdom, and a few others as well. If you notice, there's a big difference in human sex chromosomes with the X and the Y for humans between the two of them. The Y chromosome did evolve from the X chromosome and has concentrated on it many of the genes that are involved in determining. And so that accumulation of called the sex determining region of Y or SRY. And so that is the way the X and Y chromosomes look in humans. They don't look exactly the same in all other mammals. But it's nice to every now and then reflect on what the human situation is. Also, define sex anatomically. Primary sex characteristics are those that are present at birth. So that's why the doctor can say it's a boy or it's a girl. And then secondary sex characteristics are those that develop as a child matures, and they're in full bloom by the time is ready, capable of reproducing. So you get things like a beard in a human male, or the bright coloration of the feathers in a lot of the male birds that we are seeing right now in the spring. The development of both of these is controlled by sex hormones. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how powerful hormones are in the process of developing and determining sex and then maintaining it through life. Hormones have these very interesting features. They're not like nerves. They don't go from point A to point B. Instead, they're broadcast throughout the entire body in the bloodstream. So literally every cell in the body can be exposed to a hormone that is expressed into the bloodstream. They're often expressed in specific quantities and at specific times. But their impact is going to depend on the cells that are capable of detecting the hormone's presence and latching onto them, lock and key style. And then the cells will respond based on whatever their function is. So a liver cell will respond like liver, a pancreatic cell will respond like pancreas, even though the hormone is going to provide another way of being flexible. Depending on how much of it there is, the cell will respond more or less. And then finally, many cells will react to more than one hormone. So if two or more hormones happen to interact with a cell at the same time, the response of the cell is going to be some kind of mix of its response to each of the hormones independently. So we have a tremendous amount of variability potential because of the role of hormones in determining the development of sex and then the actual activity of sex. We have 7 love hormones, and these are very ancient hormones, or one or similar to them are very ancient. The steroid hormones, of which testosterone and estrogen are examples, go back to the beginning of life, basically. And these hormones are basically what drives lust in sexual interactions. So it's what drives two individuals to copulate. Attraction is a little bit different. That's, gee, I like hanging out with this individual. They make me feel good or whatever. And dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin are the hormones that are involved in may recognize because they also serve as neurotransmitters, especially in the brain. And then finally, oxytocin and vasopressin, very important for mediating attachment and bonding. And this is important where you have mates that stay together for a while, and when you have offspring that need to be cared for by the parent. So these are extremely important. Now, oxytocin and vasopressin, about so they way back to the early part of development of or the evolution of some of the multicellular organisms, way pre-vertebrate. And dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin also around 650 million years ago. So these are really ancient hormones. They've been around for a long, long time. So let's look at the two famous sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen, and look at how they biochemistry. They are both made by cholesterol, from cholesterol. They're synthesized from cholesterol. And that synthesis happens in the gonads, in the adrenal glands, and in some other tissues. And it happens in both males and females. So both males and females are producing, in mammals, are producing testosterone and estrogen, both of them. And this is why. So cholesterol is turned first into progesterone and one of its precursors, and this is commonly known as the hormone that maintains pregnancy. So we would consider it a, quote, female, unquote, as well. Those two then become precursors for other steroidal hormones. The green hormones, the green pathway there, it turns into cortisol, which is part of the fight-flight reaction that individuals have. But if you go over to the blue column, you'll see the male hormones, the androgen type hormones, the precursors, and then finally the most potent form of androgen, hydrotestosterone. And then what's very interesting is that it's these male hormone intermediates that end up being turned into, or through enzymatic reactions, the female hormones. So you can't have a female without generating male hormones. So we are very, very interdependent and intertwined hormonally between the two sexes. You can get variations in these hormone levels, influence the development of sex anatomy, can influence what I call the brain sense of sex. And this is how the brain perceives the world. Is it through a masculine lens or a feminine lens or something in between? And in humans, at least, maybe other animals, the gender identity and behavior. And given that these are all interdependent during their biochemical creation, variations in the amounts of any of these intermediates or the presence of enzymes can influence the outcome. And you should by now begin to be getting a sense of why we don't have a binary male versus female sexual representation in humans, much less any of the other animals that we see on Earth. Get hormones and anatomy interacting, because that's one of the main things that hormones do, is to influence the development of the sexual anatomy. And we can get variations in development due to at least three different factors. There can be abnormalities in the sex chromosomes themselves, or in the genes that they carry, or in other genes that are involved in determination of sex. You can also have exposure of a fetus to external estrogen or testosterone that can influence how the sexual equipment develops. Gonads are triggered to develop in the fetus. They start producing hormones, and the levels of hormones that they produce can influence further development within the fetus. So what does that look like? Well, most people don't really think about it. They just figure, okay, things happen, and then in females we produce eggs, and in males we produce sperm. The fact is, the gonads in the very beginning, they don't have a sex. They don't have a femaleness and a maleness. So it's early on influences driven by the chromosomes and the hormones, and where this indifferent gonad ends up becoming a female ovary or a male testis. So in the female, there's no Y chromosome, so there's no sex determining region of the Y there. And in the absence of the Y chromosome and the SRY, the ovary automatically develops. And it begins to secrete estrogen, which is going to lead to the development of a very important organ, the clitoris, which, ladies, has twice as many nerve endings as the male equipment does, and what I call the female brain. In other words, a brain that has a feminine perspective on life. And then here's the male. The male does have the Y chromosome, does have the SRY, and what the SRY working with early in development, it produces TDF, which is testis determining factor. And in the presence of testis determining factor, a testis will develop. If there is something's the matter with the genes that code for and produce testis determining factor, you will end up getting an ovary. You will not get a testis because the default development is female. But in a normal male, we do have TDF. The testis develops, starts to secrete testosterone, which then will trigger the development of the male physical and anatomical equipment. However, we still have the are going to go ahead and develop, even in a male, unless the male secretes another hormone, AMH, from the testis that suppresses the development of the oviduct and the uterus. If that AMH is defective and it doesn't suppress it, you will have a male that otherwise is perfectly normal, but carries within him a uterus and rudimentary oviducts. And that has been observed in human males. So begin to see how many little places here there can be slight variations that can influence the final outcome. And then we get to behavior. Now, behavior in terms of sex begins with the gametes. And the eggs and sperm for most species are very, very different. So the females produce fewer and larger gametes. They're loaded with nutrients and cell structures that are needed to support the embryo once the egg is fertilized. So they are huge relative to the males that have many smaller gametes. The sperm only contributes DNA to the fertilized egg. And with all those sperm, they're competing like crazy to be the ones to fertilize the egg. And it's the egg itself that's going to end up making the choice of which sperm fertilizes. And that's done through a chemical recognition of the sperm that meets the interests of the egg. It's a chemical matchup, so to speak, that will allow one and only one sperm to fertilize. And the ramifications are going to ripple throughout the reproductive behavior of males and females because they're both going to try to control reproductive decisions to their benefit. And I'm gonna say something before I go to the next slide. Someone is not muted because every now and then I'm hearing a little bit of noise in the background. So I want to check and make sure you're muted. Okay, so the ramifications of the difference in gamete size and function leads to very different mating perspectives. And these are the major areas of behavior that we see being acted out. And I've chosen vertebrates because we're familiar with these to a large extent. We have competition among males for the ability to copulate with females. And then we have elaborate courtship by the males to try to entice a female to be willing to copulate with the male. And the females are going to do most of the choosing. And we'll look at why in just a moment. And all three of those different behavioral sets, the male competition, the courtship, and the choice of the female, depend on there being an honest communication. And that honest communication are all the behavioral ways that individuals have of showing how healthy and vigorous and experienced they are to convince the member of the opposite sex that they would be a good partner to generate the next generation. So, what are the mating perspectives? For the male, quantity is very important. They want to mate with as many females as they possibly can. They compete intensely for the right to court and mate with the females. They, if all else fails, will use sexual coercion often to force copulation on a female. And in social species in particular, they may carry out of those infants to come into sexual receptivity more quickly. Female, very different. The female has quality top of mind because she is spending much more time and energy investing in the eggs that she generates, in the provisions for those eggs, and if she has to care for the young, in parental care, because it's overwhelmingly the female that does all of that parental caring. So she's interested in mating with the fittest male. She's going to be very choosy, not only about the male that she mates with, but about the sperm that she uses to fertilize her eggs. The end result, even though these are very different mating perspectives, the end result is that the most offspring are generated for both males and females with whatever system it is that they end up coming up with. So there are different mating systems out there, and those mating systems are heavily influenced by the resources that are needed, their abundance, their distribution in time and space, and whether or not they can be defended. So you're familiar, I'm sure, with the mating systems. There's monogamy, a single pair, and they raise their offspring together. Polyandry, where one female will mate with many males. And in this case, often it's the male of the young. There is care needed after birth or hatching. And then there's polygyny, which is the situation where you have one male that monopolizes reproduction with many females. So think, elephants, seals, lions, and so forth. There's a fourth mating system, but it also is a system that we see throughout these other three as a bet hedging system, and that's promiscuity. So in any of these other mating systems, there is always hanky-panky going on because, again, males wanting to mate with as many females as possible and females wanting to make sure, if there's a real hot guy over there, that he can father at least some of her offspring. The species are indigenous. And this is because usually if there's any parental care, the female is who is going to be doing it. Monogamy tends to be fairly uncommon. For example, only 5% of mammals are monogamous. 90% of birds are, and that's because of the difficulty of getting sufficient resources to rear the young. Polyandry, very rare. Ultimately, mating's all about the offspring, leaving a legacy to the future, so to speak. And resources are very important in evolutionary selecting for certain mating systems. And the mating systems are those that utilize limited resources effectively for reproduction. So what resources are important? Well, these first three shouldn't surprise you because all individuals need these three resources: food, water, and shelter. But when reproduction is happening, there needs to be an abundance of these resources and a persistence of them through the reproductive time period. And then important for the mating itself. A mating site, places for males and females to gather and to mate to hook up if they're going to. And then nest sites, places for the eggs to be laid or the young to be reared. And then mates themselves can be a resource. And this is, again, another reason why males will compete intensely for access to mates. I wanted to give you an example of how mating systems and social organizations interact, because it's extremely important in many species. And I chose hyenas because they're interesting to begin with. They relate, because they're mammals to one degree or another, to humans, and there are only 4 species, and they happen to cover the full gamut. So we have a monogamous species, the aardwolf, and the aardwolf feeds on termites in these large termite mounds or towers that you see in Africa. And this is a very discrete and localized resource. So it is relatively easy to defend. But even though there seem to be a tremendous amount of termites in these mounds, it's really only enough to support one pair. There, they stay together, they're monopolizing this monogamy that's centered around this very localized and defendable resource. There are 2 species of hyena that are nocturnal scavengers, feeding on carcasses that are a number of sizes from small to large. They're sort of intermediate in size. They're small in size. One species, the striped hyena, has a group of only 2 to 4 individuals, 1 female and up to 3 adult males, and they all participate in taking care of the offspring. And then there are mid-sized groups. The brown hyenas live in clans of up to 14 animals, and there will be a hierarchy within each of those clans. Now, they are not killing the prey that they're eating. They're killing prey that's been killed by animal during the daytime, and they come out at night and are feeding on these carcasses. And because there's more than just 1 or 2 of them, they are able to fend off other groups that may come and try to take away the carcass. And they're at night, so there are many fewer animals busy at night. So that's why this works for them. And then we have the large groups. And the species here are spotted hyenas, and they live in matriarchal groups of 60 to 80 individuals. They prey on antelope, which of course are herd animals. And in order to isolate a prey animal from a herd and bring it down, kill it so that you can eat it, it takes a number of individuals. So this is why their group size is much larger. They may splinter off into several different groups that will all be hunting antelope at the same time, but you need to have numbers in order to bring down an organism like that. The females remain with their maternal group, and the females are the ones that determine ranking within the group. The males disperse and become part of another clan where they will mate with the females in that group. So what does the social life look like in these groups? The females are extremely aggressive because there's intense competition over the kills to get enough food to ensure that their cubs will survive. And it's through this intense competition that ranking is established. And once rank is established, then the rank is actually conferred onto the offspring, which are aggressive from birth. So these are 1-month-olds going at each other over a piece of meat. In fact, the dominance which passes down in the alpha female's line, the dominance of the female cubs is so great that they rank above any of the males in these hyena groups. Now, the females do have this rather interesting genital. It's called a pseudopenis. It's not entirely clear how it evolved and what its adaptiveness is, because when you look at it, and this is the internal way it looks internally, I mean, it is very odd. Look at the vagina, it blends in with the clitoris. I mean, it's very odd. And the females are urinating, copulating, and giving birth through this pseudopenis, which is 1 inch wide. It, granted, will stretch a little bit, but you've got to squeeze a 2 to 3 pound cub through it. And not real good. 10% of the hyena mothers die the first time they're giving birth, and up to 60% of the cubs suffocate in the process. So clearly adaptive enough that we still have plenty of spotted hyenas out there, but you wonder, what was the adaptiveness that allowed this to evolve in the first place? Well, there are systems where odd genitalia can actually be adaptive. And ducks, I'm going to start with ducks. We have ducks that live in monogamous relationships. And in those species, the vagina is a nice straight tube, no obstructions. And the male penis is not very elaborate and is itself fairly straightforward and straight, and not real huge either, that we're looking at the top here. But there are species within which sex is forced. Mallards, for example, 40% of copulations are forced. And look at what's happened over evolutionary time to the vagina. It's become highly twisted. And the penis has also evolved to try to counter this spiraling with a penis that is also somewhat spiraled. And they do spiral, though, in opposite directions. So it doesn't work real well. And the result of that is that the female, when she doesn't want to mate with the male, he'll try to mate and copulate with her. But although 40% of the time copulation is forced, only 2 to 5% of the offspring produced by mallards turn out to be the offspring of these forced copulations. So this is pretty effective. We see something similar in bottlenose dolphins, which exist in pods of multiple males and females. Especially young males may not get much chance to reproduce. So sometimes 2 or 3 young males will gang up together. They'll isolate a single female, guard her ferociously, and forcibly mate with her. Like the duck, the dolphin female has evolved a kinky vagina. So if she doesn't like the male, she just needs to twist slightly during the copulation and steer the penis and the sperm into one of the dead end kinks in the vagina. If she likes the male, she can relax, as will the mallard duck. If she likes the male she's copulating with, relax a little, and then things will work out okay. So choice on the part of the female, even when they're being forced to have sex, is there because of the anatomy of these particular species. And now I'm going to talk about mammals in a little bit. And in particular, I think as women, we can relate to this paradox because many of us have been through childbirth. The embryo, and this is a very early embryo up here, is a little interloper into the uterus, and it is very aggressive and attacks the uterine lining of the female and burrows into it to create the placenta. So the placenta is mostly embryonic tissue from the embryo. Well, the embryo has half of its genetic information from the father and half from the mother. So the combination is foreign to the mother's body. And normally when the mother's body detects a foreign cell like that, the immune system kicks into action and attacks it and destroys it. Well, we don't want that happening with a mammal who's trying to nurture the embryo internally and provide it with what it needs to grow to an infant that can be born and survive outside of the womb. So something's got to happen. to maintain the pregnancy. So we're going to look at the way the uterus operates to prepare for pregnancy. Every month, going through a menstrual cycle, a new lining and a new set of arteries develop, and the arteries are spiraled, and the spiraling reduces the blood flow so that if there's no pregnancy, the lining and the arteries are detached and shed, but without a lot of blood loss. Although there are times when I wondered, it seemed like a lot of blood loss to me, but it heals over and then it starts all over again. Now, if there is a pregnancy, the little tiny embryo begins to burrow and really invade the uterine tissue, sending its cells up around these arteries and even inside them, so that the arteries swell, become limper, the blood flow begins to increase, and they would keep right on going if they could. The female cannot allow this to continue. And this is the danger, for example, with ectopic pregnancies, because there aren't any breaks to an ectopic pregnancy. And the immune system will really go wild when it detects it. So what happens in the uterus? Well, the uterus and the embryo begin to talk. The mother's immune cells move to the placenta and work with the maternal endometrium to provide a barrier to uninhibited embryonic invasion. So they're going to contain the invasion of this interloper. And the fetal cells, the invading cells, begin to dialogue with the mother's immune cells. This is a chemical dialogue. They kind of let the immune cells know they're there. The immune cells are looking at them. And the immune cells, if they're happy, will begin to actually promote the invasive growth of fetal tissue. But they'll keep it contained within the uterus. At the same time, if the chemistry they are detecting coming from the embryo is off, it just isn't right, they can initiate the process of a miscarriage. So the immune cells are actually serving the purpose of screening for inferior embryos, and something like 30% of pregnancies end quite early because of the embryo not appearing, quote, right, unquote, to the female body, or because the embryo itself atrophies because there's something really wrong with it. The bottom line is that for a successful pregnancy, the mother and fetus need to maintain this delicate balance. They need to continue to dialogue, or the fetus isn't going to thrive. But now the baby's born, and now we have this other miraculous aspect of being a mammal. We have milk, and milk is nature's natural nurturing. There are a few other animals that also produce a milk, but we're going to talk about the mammalian milk. We know there's protein and sugar, the lactose and fats, and that's nourishing the embryo. Or I'm sorry, not the embryo. We don't have an embryo anymore. We have an actual baby. But we have this other set of sugars that are prebiotics. They cannot be digested by the baby, but they feed 700 different kinds of microbes that are in the digestive tract of the infant, coming from the milk, coming from its exposure while it's born, coming through the vaginal canal there in the female. And these microbes are eating these sugars and dividing and so forth. The sugars also happen to attract pathogenic bacteria. The bacteria stick to those sugars and then are just eliminated in the baby's poop. So you get a lot of bang for your buck out of these prebiotics. One of the really important ones is Bifidobacterium longum infantis. This bacteria releases fatty acids that feed the cells lining the baby's intestines to nurture and nourish those cells. It also encourages the gut cells to make adhesives that seal the gaps between the cells that line the gut so that the stuff inside the intestine doesn't leak into the rest of the body. And it encourages the gut cells to make anti-inflammatory molecules to train the baby's immune system to accept microbes that are beneficial. This is setting the stage and beginning to allow the baby to develop its own internal microbiome. And we all have it, and it's part of what allows us to remain healthy. Unfortunately, only about 10% of US babies have this bacteria, and this is because of the long period of time when bottle feeding was heavily emphasized. Hopefully that's beginning to turn and make a comeback. Breastfeeding is, and people are also looking at ways to maybe seed a newborn with bifidobacterium because it's so important. Now, we need to look at the other end of a female's life. Females are fertile for most animals. The female's fertile for her entire life, but menopause happens in a very small number of species of vertebrates. A few primates, and as I'll talk about in a moment, 4 species of whales. But in primates, human females create 3 to 7 million egg follicles while they are a fetus. And then they're lost in huge batches. So by the time a female baby is born, there are only 1 to 2 million egg follicles left. By the time she has matured in puberty, there are only 300 to 500,000 left. And by the time she's age 30, up to 90% of them are lost, because every time a woman goes through a menstrual cycle, she will end up maturing only 1 egg follicle usually, but 1,000 others will die during that month. So by the time a woman reaches menopause, there may be only 1,000 to 2,000 left. And as I said, most animals don't go through menopause. Most animals are fertile right up till the end. But there are a few primates that do have some sort of menopause. The chimp is one, but the chimp goes on a little bit longer than the female. The egg depletion rate in human females is about the same as it is for chimps until about the age of 35. And then in humans, the depletion rate accelerates, and we don't exactly know why, but otherwise human eggs would last until age 70. Now, I don't know about you, but at the age of 70, I don't particularly want to become pregnant. So, we go through menopause. And the question is, why don't those eggs last? And we don't really know. And we don't really understand why menopause happens. And we're beginning to theorize and gain some information about why it has evolved and persisted in the few species in which we know that it occurs. So there's some primates and 4 whale species. All of them are social species, and you're going to see that may be playing a role in why menopause exists. So the first hypothesis for its existence is that we just outlive our egg follicles. So we run out of them. And if you look at 2 of the primates that are not humans that have a distinct menopause, you can see that they have a reasonable percent of their time, 15 to almost 30% of their lifespan, where they may be menopausal. But look at the percentage of a potential human lifespan that humans are menopausal. It's huge. It's huge. So we'll look at, and you can think about, well, why might that be? But the percentage of time the females are fertile is much less than the percentage of lifespan for macaques and chimps. And chimps are our very close cousin in terms of evolution. So something has gone on to make menopause, that lengthy menopause, very effective for humans, adaptive for humans. So one reason it might be adaptive and we get clues also from looking at orcas here, is that older women and older females, in the case of orcas or chimps, have a lot of wisdom that may have nothing to do with breeding. So the orca matriarch, for example, knows what food is best, where to find it, how to hunt for it, what time it's likely to appear, and so forth. So she holds a reservoir of knowledge that it's going to take the younger females a long time to learn. So the experience is aiding her genetic relatives, even if she's no longer reproducing, and she's avoiding competition for reproduction with her younger reproducing kin. And of course, we might have a combination of these two explanations for why menopause exists. For humans, what grandmothers do is remember and pass it on. We have a long juvenile period, extended caregiving, and as they say, it takes a village to raise a child. And so grandmothers have been there, done that. They have lots to offer. One of the very important things they offer is touch. Cuddling and caring for an infant and a young toddler helps shape their brain circuits and to social and emotional responses. We are a social species. This is extremely important. And along with that, being extremely social is the importance of language. So babies are primed to learn language, but they need constant contact with speaking models. And the more speaking models they can be exposed to, the better. The critical period, infancy through early childhood. So grandmas are wise, and they share their wisdom and their complex information that is needed for this complex social life that we live. So menopause, the existence of it, that long period of menopause, allowed for a period of longevity without reproduction during which their wisdom could be shared. Now, I wanted to spend a little bit of time looking at the varieties of sex and gender in animals, which is basically the complexity of hormones in action. So these are going to travel much broader than just mammals in terms of examples. One way of reproducing for females is parthenogenesis, and males can't do this. Only females can reproduce parthenogenetically. And this means their unfertilized eggs develop into the next generation. Daphnia, small crustacean relative that lives in water, they will reproduce asexually unless the environment begins to deteriorate. And then they will mate with males and leave sexually recombined variants for the next generation. Aphids reproduce asexually during the pleasant part of their year. And when the environment starts to deteriorate towards winter, they will have sex at that point, and they will overwinter as a larva. Both of these two are hedging their bets against a potential change in the environment. So if you recall, one of the main advantages of sex is the fact that it introduces genetic variation into the next generation. So that's what Daphnia and aphids and many others that are parthenogenic do. The Ambystoma salamander, and this is a vertebrate, it steals sperm from related species to stimulate but not fertilize the eggs. And then every now and then they will have sex with male ambystomas, but they don't need it in order to continue to reproduce parthenogenically. And then there are the whiptail lizards. They don't have males at all, just females. But they still need copulation to trigger the development of the eggs into an embryo. So they take turns playing male. Lots of interesting variation there. But then there's some that we can relate to as humans. There are at least 300 species of vertebrates in which homosexual behavior has been documented. This is a pair of male bald eagles that have successfully mated and reared chicks with 2 females. And the first female was killed after the second, I guess, year. And then the second female came in, and they have been breeding with her for a number of years. I don't know whether they're still alive, but it had gone on for 6 or 7 years at the time that the report came out. And then there are albatrosses. Albatrosses nest on offshore islands. It's very difficult to get enough food to feed the young. They usually only rear 1 chick per brood, and often there are not enough males to go around. If that's the case, 2 females will pair up. They will go off and have hanky-panky with a male that's mated to some other female, and then they'll come back and they'll lay their eggs in a common nest, and the 2 of them will rear whatever egg survives. If they both don't survive, survives early after hatching. They often will stay together from 1 year to the next, even if males become available, or sometimes the partnership will fall apart if a male mates with one of the females. And then we have transvertebrates. So this is in fish in particular. The wrasse are fish that live on reefs in a small group of wrasse, and the top wrasse is a male. If you remove that wrasse from the group, the largest female will change from female to male completely. She becomes reproductively active as a male, produces sperm, looks like a male, behaves like a male, absolutely male from whatever you can tell. Nemo, just as versatile, but in the other direction. So if the female who's the top individual in the group dies, the largest male transitions fully into a female, produces eggs, whole 9 yards. The next largest male will mature into a reproductively active male and become the mate of this female. So those of you who've taken your grandchildren to see Finding Nemo probably didn't know that this goes on in that species, but fascinating that this kind of transition exists in our distant vertebrate relatives. Human females, and I wanted to at least acknowledge cultural changes or cultural expressions or cultural attitudes, roles, what have you, of human females. If you look back in the artifacts that we have present back in time, the female has played a role, a clear role that has been noticed actively beyond simply producing children. And you can see that in some of the very early sculpture, the Venus of Willendorf. There was a midwife who was fairly famous back, I think it's around in the 100s AD in Rome, Scribonia Atice. And she was famous enough to have this sculpture mosaic made of her. Wet nurses have been around forever. I mean, even back at the time when the Homo sapiens was at the very beginning of its evolutionary appearance, they lived in groups. They were very social. And if a mother died when the infant was young, it's very, very likely that one of the other females would have nurtured that infant. And of course, wet nurses have mixed reputations, or we have mixed feelings looking back on some of the wet nurses that were used in the past. And then there are the wise women, often accused of witchcraft because the men didn't understand what they were doing. And some of the women maybe didn't like maybe some of the news they were given, or, whatever, maybe they were jealous. So the wise woman has been present with us for a long time. And if you look more recently, we have some iconic examples of the change in the role women have been able to take on in our modern society. Susan B. Anthony, one of the earliest promoters of women's rights and suffrage, and very influential influential in the temperance movement. Rosie the Riveter in World War II. Hillary Clinton, the first female candidate for president. And then we're slowly beginning to acknowledge the fact that not everyone that sex isn't binary. It isn't binary in other animals. Why should it be binary in the human? And these are two examples. Caitlyn Jenner, who transitioned from male to female, one of the more famous known transitions that's happened. And Brittany Griner, who hasn't transitioned. She identifies as female. She is lesbian and has been in the news lately, but another great example of how there is beginning to be acceptance of some of the variety, some of the absolutely natural variety that occurs in femaleness in humans. So I know we're getting a little bit late. I usually have a lot of cartoons in my presentations. So I did cherry pick a few. For those of you who have seen both the beginning and are now at the latter end of life, this one should ring a few bells. For those of you who are still in the beginning stages of your adult life as a female, this one may ring a little bit more true. Hopefully not this one down here in the bottom. And then, of course, the middle one, grandmas are very important. So grandma in her twilight years, the youngsters are at daybreak. And that's the purpose of grandmas, is to nurture their grandchildren. And then lastly, I want to draw your attention to the resources that I have used, and one way or the other, whether in the video, or maybe I can figure out some way to post these so that you can have them. These are the resources that I would recommend highly. The top three are the textbooks that I used for my senior college courses. They cover a lot of the new information about femaleness, and they do it in a very accessible, very readable way. Sex and Sensibility is a short video. It's a little biochemically wonky, but boy, your mind will be blown finding out about the interactions that take place with the hormones and the genes that determine the sex. Joan Roughgarden, I knew for 20 years as Jonathan Roughgarden back at Stanford. She transitioned, gosh, she must have been in her 50s in 1998, and has become a real advocate for the way in which diversity, gender, and sexuality is expressed in nature and in humans. And she has this particular resource available as a PDF for free online. So that's the link that, at least last time I looked, got you there. And then finally, the Native Americans and the First Nations and people in Canada, they have a very different view of the diversity of gender than the stereotypical European-derived view. And Thompson Highway did a 5-episode podcast with the CBC on their program called Ideas, and this is the link to get to it, talking about sex, death, and accordions. But he talks about language, the creation myths, which are heavily female-oriented for the First Nations peoples, sex and gender, humor and death. The Passamaquoddy, for example, here in Maine, recognize 7 different genders and welcome those 7 different genders. So a very different way of viewing it, and one that hopefully we as a society, even though it's really rough right now, are beginning to ooze our way towards acceptance thereof. And so that is the end of my presentation, and hopefully there's still some people there. I haven't scared you all away with all of that information. But thank you for listening, for being there. So if there are any questions, I am happy to hang out as long as you are to answer them.
Whoa.
Barbara, I've got a question.
Sure.
I almost always do. I forgot the biological technical term, parthenogenesis,
Parthenogenesis.
parthenogenesis. Okay. Where you get birth without with just one sex, with just the female. I think recently I saw a story, and it might have even been down here, one of the North Carolina aquariums, where they had a tank, and they had, I don't know if it was what type of fish it was, or a stingray or something, but anyway, one of their,
Stingray. It could have been a stingray.
yeah, it got pregnant, and they said, but there was no male, and we have no
Right.
idea how this happened. But then I thought I heard something saying, well, that can sometimes happen. Uh,
Yes.
in,
So
in
let me talk a little bit about that. Some of the sharks are one of the vertebrate species that can carry out parthenogenesis. Um, but as they said, sometimes it can happen even if it's not a regular thing. If something goes wrong during the creation of the gametes and they end up fusing back together so that you end up with the double number of chromosomes, and then you have, the right kind of hormonal circumstance, you can get what's called spontaneous parthenogenesis. Um, as far as we know, that doesn't happen in mammals. There haven't been any really well-documented incidences of that, but it has happened in sharks, for example, and in some others which escape me right now. So yeah, it can happen. Not something that is going to happen probably in humans, or more are really or animals that have a really complex way of managing their sexual activity. It's going to be much less likely that parthenogenesis would occur.
well, you anticipated my follow-up, and that is, could it happen in mammals, or for
Yeah.
that matter, in humans? And but what I think I hear you saying is that maybe, but it would be extremely rare.
Extremely rare, extremely rare. Like one of the other things I didn't mention when I was talking about the development of the female versus the male's equipment, very, very rarely in female or in humans, you can get a female with an ovotestis. And that means the gonad has both ovarian tissue and testicular tissue, and they usually are separated like this. And the ovarian part will end up creating the eggs. The testis part will end up creating testosterone. And there are two species of moles in which that is the normal for females. And they need to have that aggressive muscular body that testosterone promotes, because they're digging down there in the dirt all the time, and that requires an intense muscular body. So a little bit of oddity there going on.
I know, because they're in my yard and they really drive me crazy. Okay, but I can see why people are a little skeptical about the virgin birth, but they shouldn't be totally um uh non-believing, is where I'm
Yeah.
ending up.
Yeah, well, not in other animals anyway, but I would be well, yeah.
Rare.
Let's not go there.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Ria, you had a question. It looks like you got your hand up there. You have to unmute in order to ask it if you want to ask it. Ria? Yeah.
There we go.
There you are. Good.
So first, I feel compelled, Karen, and I feel compelled to make a historical correction. Hillary Clinton was not the first woman to run for president.
Okay, very good. Thank you. But she was the first one we got exposed to.
Well, no,
really.
People of our age were exposed to Shirley Chisholm in 1970.
That's true. That actually is true.
And people a little bit older than us would remember 1872, when Victoria Woodhull ran for president.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking the major party. But you're right. I do vaguely remember Shirley Chisholm when she ran. Yes.
And Victoria Woodhull, who is a real character. She's a whole other story. But I do have a question. You mentioned early on, you referred to the idea of the quote unquote female brain.
Yeah.
And a whole other conversation is waiting to happen about nurture and nature and nurture. And I know we don't have time for that now, but can you say a little more about that? Because it's subject of so much controversy.
What I meant by female brain and is not that, you know, there's only female brains and male brains. What I meant was that you can have a brain that is more oriented towards feminine kinds of things, and maybe they're more nurturing, whatever. And then you can have a male brain that's more oriented towards masculine kinds of things, maybe more aggressive or assertive or what have you. But you have male brains that have been to one degree or another, quote unquote, feminized. I mean, they're more nurturing. I have a son-in-law who's incredibly nurturing. And, you know, that may be due to the fact that since males produce estrogen the same way females do, that they have a brain that is a little bit more receptive to those kinds of perspectives on life and interacting with children, for example, as opposed to being, you know, the rough and tumble and, you know, let's get out there, which you might see with some dads, as opposed to dads that are more sensitive, that's not a good word, are more nurturing in the sense of cuddling and, you know, more of, this is where I get slippery, because we don't have language. If, you know, if I had grown up as a Passamaquoddy, I might have language to be able to describe this, because they deal very, very well with this blend of masculine and feminine approaches to life, and the blending thereof. So yeah, there is no such thing as just a female brain, just a male brain, but they do have slightly different but very much overlapping perspectives.
My question was more about not so much about the biochemistry and the variations in the biochemistry, but the tension between the idea of how much of who we become is the result of our genetics and our chemistry, and how much is the result of our nurturing. And it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, it sounds like you're significantly downplaying the role of nurture, but perhaps you aren't, and I wanted to give you
no. So now I didn't quite get where you were going, but let me put that into context a little bit. Throughout your life, you are producing estrogen and testosterone throughout your life. So your experiences as you grow up may very well influence the balance of those two that circulate in your bloodstream, and they are going to get to the brain. So they very well may have some influence. Are they going to outweigh the genetic influence? You know, this kind of thing just has not really been studied. And to be honest, I don't know how you would study it. You know, you're not going to pump some poor kid up with a hormone just to see what happens to their brain. So, but I think it's really clear that experience is going to influence the way in which hormones are released, which is then going to influence the way you respond in the future to one degree or another. Anyone else?
Well, I'll say something. Barb, I'm so proud of you. Such an in-depth, comprehensive study. It's kind of mind-boggling. It's beyond my frame of reference, but I'm very proud of you. And we know it all began at Wells, right?
Yes, it did. It did. But I do encourage you, if you're at all interested in this, to pick up those books that I referenced, that I used as my textbooks for the senior college courses, because I learned, and you know, I'm a biologist, right? These are books that were published, one in 2022, the other one in 2023. And what I learned by reading those is what got me to teach the courses. So I guarantee you there is information in there that you have no idea about. So I really would encourage you to dig into it if you're at all interested. They're very readable, very readable.
And I believe Rachel says in her chat that she will send, or she's she's available to make copies. I think Kathy had
Yeah.
a comment.
Yeah, well, or I can make a PDF copy of just that slide and send it to Rachel, and then if we can get it out to everyone.
I would
Okay.
just like to say that there is no way that I'm going to ask any question about this right now, because I've turned into a pumpkin about half an hour ago. But I think this provides an incredible basis for what could be a mind-boggling discussion on the whole trans issue that is so present now in our society. And I would love to do that, but not now.
Yeah, I actually I interviewed in order to get ready for teaching the course. I talked to a trans male, and to find out why he had gone through that process and what it had been like for him. And I feel that if we end up with a discussion, I, as a cisgendered person, there is no way I can do justice to what it's like or to what the right approach is. A lot of the controversy right now is about, how do you treat and work with somebody who feels that they're in the wrong sexed body. Some of these are young kids. Some of the treatments can cause all sorts of problems if you try to reverse them. So it's going to be a huge discussion if it happens.
Barb, can I chime in here?
Sure.
I have learned a tremendous amount about transgender over the last 2 or 3 years, a tremendous amount. And I am connected with the Transgender Resource Center here in Albuquerque. And the guy who leads that travels throughout the state of New Mexico, as well as other places in the West, teaching about transgender and helping all of us cis folks to understand what it is. Now, he and Marty, I'll talk to you about this offline, but he has already said to me he would be more than willing to do some Zoom teachings to my college groups. And so, Marty, I'll get in touch with you, but if there's sufficient interest, I mean, the guy is a really good teacher, is what I can say. And experienced. He is actually a trans man.
Yeah.
And he tells that story and the whys of his journey.
And it's going to be a different journey for each person that goes through that.
And seems to be, from what I've learned, and different reasons and blah, blah, blah. But I got to go too, although it's early.
Yeah.
Marty, I'll be in touch if you're still there.
I'm here.
Okay. Barb, thanks a million.
Oh, you're
Thanks.
welcome. You're
Amen.
welcome. Yeah.
I will correct you. I will tell you one small thing. The term Aphrodite, what is it?
Hermaphrodite.
Right.
Hermaphrodite. That is a term that is very offensive to people who are trans and
Yes.
to people who
Yes.
are in fact hermaphrodites. So
Yes.
I saw it on your slide.
Did I have that hermaphrodite on my slide?
Yes, you do.
I think
Well,
you did. I think you did. Thank you for saying that. I think scientifically though, I think it's appropriate. Appropriate scientifically.
Yeah, I don't know where
Right.
it was.
Not to a human being.
Not for right.
All I'm
Yeah.
saying is that to the people in the
No, I wouldn't
trans
have used it that way.
LGBTQ community, that is horribly offensive.
Yeah, no, I didn't remember that I had that word there, but at any rate, somebody just said, am I in Maine? Yes, I am in Maine. So there's the answer there to the person who had that question. Let me, just for the people who are there, because I think it's so interesting, and because the Native Americans and the First Nations people have a very different view. The 7 genders they recognize are fully female, fully male, homosexual female, homosexual male, trans female, trans male, and something very unusual called a two-spirit. And the two-spirit is someone who is completely balanced with the male and the female. And two-spirit people are recognized by the elders of their tribe. And they hold an incredibly important role in holding the balance of that tribe. And I was fortunate enough to hear a presentation by a two-spirit, Passamaquoddy, here in Maine. And it's, you know, it's just really eye-opening that there is a culture out there living among us, really, that has a very different view of diversity in regard to sex and gender than what we grew up, most of us, I'm assuming, grew up with. So I just want to, you know, give a shout out to that culture, because they, in many ways, at least in this regard, have been more inclusive than we certainly are.
Absolutely true.
Rhea, you have another question?
Yeah, but I want to make sure, I don't want to take over if somebody else has one, so I'm going to wait. Can I go, or does somebody else want to ask something? Nobody
You can
else?
go.
I have a comment, but I can wait.
Okay, so I'm would be interested in hear, and you a lot of what you said referenced this concept, but I don't think you actually used it, and that's the idea of intersexuality.
Yeah.
Children, human children who are born with significant you know, I don't know, parts, or, you know, hormonal structure or whatever, of both biological sexes. And the controversy, what used to happen, you know this, what used to happen is that the parents and the surgeon would decide at birth to figure out which sex the kid was supposed to be and do surgery. And a lot of these people grew up feeling, not because they were trans, but feeling like they were not in the right bodies because the surgery had been done on them. And the movement now is for folks to just grow up and go through puberty and then make a decision about how they want to live their lives, which may or may not include surgery. So what in your work?
I didn't look into intersex a lot, but I did show you that one example of how a person who's, for all intents and purposes, a full male can have a uterus. And so there's just so many steps that take place and so many interactions that are going on to end up with the anatomy and the physiology of an individual with respect to sex, that, you know, there are all sorts of places where a little minor change can have a really quite traumatic outcome. So, and as with, you know, anything else that's in a spectrum, you can't lump something like intersex into one little pigeonhole. It's going to be variable itself. There are, you know, and I briefly looked at it, but I just don't remember. I mean, there is some discussion of what does intersex mean. I don't have it on the top of my head, so I'm not really going to say much more. But what I do remember is it's not a monolithic thing by any means.
Wow.
Yeah, I've got a comment. Deb Gagnon is on here. She's a professor of psychology at Wells and in our health sciences for 20 years now. She came when I was a junior psych major. The year they announced we were going co-ed, she came. But what was the class? You taught a class about the psychology of animals, right? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it was animal cognition, actually.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it wasn't really, didn't, you know, venture into the question of sex in the way that you just did, which was fascinating. It was more about animal thought and, you know, cognition. So.
And animals are so much smarter than we've been giving them credit for.
Yes, yes. And that was actually the topic of my alumni college presentation last year.
I was just typing that in the chat. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
thank you, Rachel, for that shout out.
yes, and if you guys want to connect, I can help facilitate that.
Yeah, no, I actually taught a course for the senior college on the brain, and one of the things we did talk about was animal intelligence, and we looked at the, the diversity there. And yeah, so no, it's animals are actually amazing, and we don't give them enough credit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was great to hear about the diversity among, animals in terms of gender, sex, it's that was really fascinating.
You should read the book Bitch.
Yeah,
That
okay.
was on there, because that's what she does. She looks at all sorts of different kinds of animals. She's a reporter, not a scientist, but she's interviewed a slew of researchers in the animal behavior field. So in terms of the breadth of ways in which different animals approach femaleness, and I think you would enjoy that book.
Okay, thank you. I will. Rachel, can you send me that book list?
Yes, I screenshot it, or I'm gonna,
Well, I will send you a PDF. I'll pull it out
Okay.
and send you a PDF of just
Okay.
that slide.
Thanks.
Great.
And
That was-
Deb also just got the Best Academic Advising Award.
Oh,
from
congratulations.
Thank you.
And what a time to do it after 20 years
Right.
at Wells. And
Yeah, it was actually sort of in recognition of 20 years of academic advising. So that was really meaningful to me.
That's great. That's great.
as a psych major, she's awesome.
Now, isn't that what us
Congratulations.
teachers have always worked for? Our pats on the back and the kudos and all the rest of it.
It was so meaningful to me.
Yes.
Just
Actually,
so
yeah, you've been,
And
Deb's been my example last week when I got to peep into a couple of her classes and just seeing the work with the students about just all of the support that you would,
well,
I
I'd
know I
like
wasn't going to talk about this, but all of the support that you would hope our students are getting, and they're getting. Like, our faculty, as you all know, are just so awesome, and our students have just been nothing but caring about us.
Yeah.
Well, can
and
I just say to the faculty and staff who are on this call that as an alum from 67, I wish you all the absolute best as you transition to your next roles in life.
Thank you.
I mean, I am with you. I am with you. This is, there is
Yeah.
something out there for you.
And
That I
believe
know.
me, we are all with the alums as well.
Yeah. Well, and you're always part of Wells now.
Yeah.
We are all part of Wells, and we'll just keep it going, even if it's our own individual way of being in the world.
Yep. I'm actually looking into getting a ring for myself.
Good. Good. Yeah,
somebody told me that would be okay. An alum
Yeah.
told me that would be okay. So
mine no longer fits on my finger.
I've had to change fingers.
I would just like to make a recommendation that, in the spirit of the liberal arts and this topic, if you haven't read Middlesex, which is a fictional book, it's a fascinating, really, it's just an excellent fictional characterization of intersex.
It was one of the first.
Yeah.
It came out 20 years ago?
Yeah, at least.
And was shocking, was reviewed as being shocking that this was being talked about and that this was happening. The attitudes towards trans and intersex people has changed, but it's a wonderful book.
It really is. And it's a very compassionate book and
very well written.
Very well written. Yes, it's a should be a classic.
Yeah.
So Middlesex, Jeffrey Eugenides.
I just popped something into the chat about a couple of our students on the lacrosse team, which how amazing is our lacrosse team?
Yes.
A couple of them couldn't afford a Wells ring yet. They're much more expensive now, you guys. But
Sure.
A few of them showed me they got the Wells seal on beautiful rings, and it's a beautiful ring from Etsy. So I know I'm supposed to promote our Wells rings. We love them. But if anybody wants that, shoot me an email and I'll send you the Etsy link that the student sent to me, and several of them did this. So I thought that was a really cool, creative way to keep the sisterhood. They also still call it sisterhood despite being co-ed. So just a little fun fact. And it's on a lot of their like odd even posters and stuff. But yeah, let me know if I can connect anybody on this call. I think we've done all the questions, but feel free to pipe in. And I don't know what the next step will be. I mean, I could just do a rogue version of this, but in terms of our records and everything, that's going to be WCA stuff. So I don't have those details yet, but I would love to keep doing this type of work, and with Fran Kissel to do something like our crafting nights. I mean, very laid back, just a way to connect. I don't see why we couldn't do that. So,
And I just want to thank Rachel and Randy for hosting this just amazing series. Rachel, you could be a podcast host. I mean, you're just so good at this. And I also want to let everybody know that Rachel has an important birthday tomorrow.
Oh,
And
that's
that we
right.
should maybe sing the congratulations song to her.
well, it's very
Turning-
chaotic on Zoom. We've
It's
tried.
hard on Zoom.
Yes, it
Okay.
is.
She
Yeah.
is turning 40.
Yep.
Oh,
I am, and I get to be on campus next week with all of our seniors and Deb doing a kickball game, and it is it's awesome. I've had my birthday on, moving up day and all these things. So spring babies are the best.
Oh, now wait a minute.
I forgot that you were also that you were another May birthday. Yeah. I have one coming up, but it's not as important, as exciting as Rachel.
Oh, 40 is pretty cool. I mean, jobless and 40. I love getting to age. Thank you. It's a blessing.
It is.
Well, happy birthday, Rachel, and thank you so much for this
Yes,
series.
thank
Yes,
you,
thank
Rachel.
you.
Randy.
Yeah,
And we
yeah,
really,
no, it's been
it
fun.
actually came from Marty Severance, who's on, who was crafting this during 2020. It was going to be that first in-person session, and Ria, and I'm sorry, Fran, and I can't remember who else right now off the top of my head, but they were doing their planning for Seneca Falls, women's, all the things.
Oh, right.
Right.
Yeah, and so obviously that one didn't work until the next year. And so my friend Emily and Randy ran with doing Learning by the Lake, and then I started supporting Emily. And then now she's one of my best friends, and we still text every day. She's in Pennsylvania now with a 1-year-old baby. But anyway, so Randy and I just were able to keep it going, and we love it. It's so easy. It's great. All we're doing is making awesome connections, and we love it. Thank you guys for being here.
Well,
Amen.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
both.
you
Very
Thank
much.
you so much.
Oh, I forgot to stop recording. Oops.
Well, you can clip off all of that discussion.
Thank you all